10. Marvel once went bankrupt. Yes, you heard that right. The mighty Marvel, the company that gave us Spider-Man swinging across New York and Black Panther ruling Wakanda, once collapsed under the crushing weight of debt. By the mid-1990s, Marvel was drowning in financial trouble. Comic book sales had plummeted after the speculative bubble of the early decade burst. Collectors who once bought dozens of shiny, special edition comics stopped cold when they realized those flashy covers weren't going to make them rich. Suddenly, Marvel's empire of superheroes looked like it had no superpowers left. In 1996, Marvel actually filed for bankruptcy. Think about that for a second. The company that would one day dominate Hollywood couldn't yet even keep its lights on. And here, guys, the kicker, Marvel was forced to sell off the movie rights to many of its most popular characters just to stay alive. That's why Spider-Man ended up at Sony, and why the X-Men and Fantastic Four were with Fox. If Marvel hadn't taken that desperate step, the company might have been liquidated entirely, leaving only memories of old comics. But out of that crisis came a strange kind of blessing. Because Marvel lost control of those characters, they had to turn inward and gamble on the lesser-known heroes they still owned. That is how we eventually got the Iron Man movie in 2008, a character who was popular in the comics but nowhere near the cultural juggernaut he later became. If Marvel hadn't been bankrupt, Iron Man might never have been chosen to launch the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Bankruptcy, in a strange twist, saved Marvel by forcing it to take risks no one else would dare. Imagine this in American terms. It's like a small local football team losing all its star players, only to dig deep into its bench and discover a kid who becomes the next Tom Brady. That's what Marvel did. It took a near-death experience to give birth to the MCU. Number 9. Stan Lee didn't create Marvel alone. Say Marvel, and the first name that pops into people's heads is Stan Lee. The mustache, the glasses, the legendary cameos in almost every Marvel movie. He's practically the face of the brand. But here's the truth Marvel fans often overlook. Stan Lee didn't build Marvel by himself. He had powerful creative partners who often stayed in the shadows while Lee became the spotlight superstar. Jack Kirby, known as the King of Comics, co-created countless Marvel icons. From the Fantastic Four and the X-Men to the Avengers and Thor, Kirby's explosive artwork and cosmic imagination shaped the Marvel Universe as much as Lee's storytelling flair. Then there was Steve Ditko, the mysterious, reclusive artist who gave Spider-Man his awkward teenage energy and Doctor Strange his psychedelic mysticism. Ditko refused fame and rarely gave interviews, which made him the complete opposite of Lee's charming public persona. Stan Lee's role was crucial. He was the editor, the showman, the guy who added personality to every speech bubble. But Marvel was a team sport. And here's where things get spicy. Decades later, arguments exploded over who deserved credit. Some fans and historians accuse Marvel of letting Lee take too much of the glory while Kirby and Ditko were underpaid and under-recognized. The fights even went to court. In 2014, Marvel settled with Jack Kirby's family after years of legal battles over his creations. Think of it like a rock band. Stan Lee was the lead singer, always in front of the camera. But Jack Kirby was the guitarist writing the riffs that gave Marvel its sound. Without both of them, there is no Marvel. And the American cultural impact? Massive. In a country obsessed with individuality, the Marvel story quietly reveals something else. Great things are rarely the work of one person. They come from collaborations, arguments, messy partnerships, and sometimes bruised egos. Marvel's greatest heroes were forged not just by one genius but by a creative brawl between multiple giants, each leaving fingerprints on history. Marvel's beginnings weren't glamorous. They were fragile, chaotic, and often unfair. Bankruptcy almost killed it. Credit wars nearly tore it apart. Yet those struggles gave Marvel the resilience to survive, adapt, and eventually rise into the powerhouse we know today. The journey from comic shop bargain bins to billion-dollar box office glory is already looking like the greatest superhero origin story ever told. And we're only 2 facts in. Number 8. Marvel almost sold everything to DC. Here's a twist that sounds like a comic book what if scenario but actually happened. Marvel nearly ended up inside the house of its biggest rival, DC Comics. Picture this: Superman and Spider-Man under the same roof, Batman patrolling Gotham while bumping into Iron Man at Stark Tower. It could have been real. In the early 1980s, Marvel was struggling once again with declining sales. The superhero genre wasn't the unstoppable juggernaut we think of today. Back then, comics were seen as a fading niche. DC, home of Batman and Superman, was in slightly better shape, and Marvel's leadership made a shocking proposal: sell the entire company, heroes and all, to DC's parent company. DC executives actually sat in a room, reviewing Marvel's catalog, trying to decide if Spider-Man, Iron Man, the Hulk, and Captain America were worth buying. And here's the kicker: they said no. They didn't think Marvel's characters were strong enough to sell. They literally believed that outside of Spider-Man, nobody cared about the rest. Imagine dismissing Iron Man, Thor, and the X-Men as second-rate. It was like someone in the 1980s being offered the rights to Apple for pocket change and turning it down because they thought personal computers were a fad. That's how big this missed opportunity was. If DC had said yes, the entire superhero landscape would be unrecognizable. The rivalry that drives comic book culture, the debates over Batman versus Iron Man, the fan wars over Marvel versus DC movies, would never have existed. Instead of competition, there would have been a monopoly, with DC holding all the cards. And without competition, maybe superhero movies wouldn't have exploded into mainstream culture at all. This near sale reminds us of something very American. Business history is full of missed shots. From Blockbuster turning down Netflix to Kodak ignoring digital cameras, arrogance and short-sightedness can change the future. In this case, DC's dismissal gave Marvel the fire to keep fighting. That chip on its shoulder eventually led Marvel to create its own destiny rather than being absorbed. So next time you watch an Avengers film, remember, it only exists because DC said, no thanks. Number 7. The first Marvel movie was a total disaster. We all think of Marvel movies today as polished spectacles, sleek CGI, witty dialogue, post-credit scenes that make fans scream. But the first attempt at bringing Marvel to the big screen? It was a flaming wreck. And no, I'm not talking about 2008's Iron Man. I'm talking about 1986's Howard the Duck. Yes, Howard the Duck, the cigar-chomping, wisecracking duck from another dimension, was the first Marvel character to headline a theatrical film. And it bombed. Hard. Produced by George Lucas, fresh off his Star Wars success, the film had a budget of around $37 million, but barely made a dent at the box office. Critics destroyed it. Audiences scratched their heads. Instead of launching Marvel into cinematic glory, Howard the Duck became a punchline. The story was bizarre. Imagine a human woman falling in love with an alien duck. Add clumsy puppetry, awkward jokes, and a confused tone that wasn't sure if it was for kids or adults, and you get a cinematic train wreck. For years, Howard the Duck was considered one of the worst movies ever made. But here's the twist. Even in failure, Marvel learned. The movie showed Hollywood executives that Marvel properties were risky, weird, and not easy to adapt. It forced Marvel to be more careful with its next steps, and decades later, Marvel actually embraced Howard the Duck as a cult icon, even sneaking him into cameos in Guardians of the Galaxy. It's a very American story. Failure doesn't always kill you. Sometimes it teaches you how to rise again. Silicon Valley is built on that idea. Entrepreneurs fail startups before building billion-dollar companies. Athletes lose championships before winning rings. Marvel bombed with Howard the Duck, but instead of folding, it eventually figured out how to make movies that could rule the world. And think about this. Without that failure, would Marvel have been humble enough to listen to fans, experiment carefully, and eventually hire the right creative teams? Maybe not. Howard the Duck-esque flop might have been the growing pain Marvel needed before it was ready to soar. Lurker 6, Marvel's first big-screen hit. Wasn't a superhero. When you think of Marvel's first taste of real Hollywood success, your mind probably jumps to Iron Man or maybe Blade. But here's the twist: Marvel Iwi's very first breakout film was to a T about capes, mutants, or cosmic powers. It was Blade, the half-vampire vampire hunter played by Wesley Snipes in 1998. Blade wasn't marketed as a Marvel movie. In fact, many moviegoers didn't even know it came from a comic book at all. Studios at the time were terrified of putting Marvel's name up front because of past failures like Howard the Duck. Instead, they sold Blade as a dark, violent action horror film, something closer to The Matrix than Spider-Man. And it worked. The movie made over $130 million worldwide on a $45 million budget. More importantly, it proved that Marvel characters could succeed on the big screen if given the right treatment. Without Blade, there might never have been an X-Men in 2000 or a Spider-Man in 2002. Blade cracked the door open and showed Hollywood that Marvel wasn't a joke. It was a goldmine waiting to be tapped. Culturally, Blade was also groundbreaking. In an era when superhero films were dominated by white leads, Wesley Snipes became one of the first black actors to headline a major comic book movie. And he killed it. His cool trench coat, sword fights, and one-liners gave fans a hero unlike anything else in theaters at the time. Blade didn't just save Marvel financially. It shifted the image of what a superhero could look like. It's worth noting how American audiences responded. Blade came out at the height of the late 90s action boom, when audiences craved stylized violence and anti-heroes. Think Keanu Reeves in The Matrix or Arnold Schwarzenegger's darker roles. Blade fit right in, but it had the added appeal of being based on a comic book. Suddenly, comic book movies weren't kiddie fare. They were edgy, adult, and profitable. If you want to trace the DNA of the MCU, you don't start with Iron Man. You start with Blade cutting through vampires in a techno nightclub, showing Hollywood that Marvel's characters could dominate if handled with care. Lurker 5. Marvel's heroes were created as social commentary. One of the most fascinating facts about Marvel is that its heroes weren't just created to sell comics. They were designed to mirror the anxieties, struggles, and dreams of America itself. Unlike the flawless, godlike characters at DC, Marvel's heroes were flawed, complicated, and often political. Take the X-Men. Created in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement, they weren't just mutants. They were metaphors. Professor X represented a Martin Luther King Jr. style leader advocating peaceful coexistence, while Magneto mirrored Malcolm X's more militant fight against oppression. Through the lens of mutant struggles, Marvel tackled racism, segregation, and the fear of those who are different. Spider-Man was another revolutionary creation. Instead of a billionaire playboy or alien god, Peter Parker was a broke teenager from Queens who had to juggle school, work, and paying the rent while fighting crime. He embodied the working-class struggle of America, a relatable hero who made mistakes and carried guilt. With great power comes great responsibility. Wasn't just a catchphrase. It was a moral lesson for every kid picking up the comic. Even Captain America evolved with the times. In the 1940s, he was punching Nazis, a patriotic symbol during World War II. But in later decades, he became a critique of blind nationalism, often clashing with the U.S. government when it betrayed its ideals. In the 1970s, Marvel even had Cap abandon his identity after uncovering government corruption, a storyline reflecting the Watergate scandal and America's loss of trust in leadership. This is where Marvel truly separated itself from DC. DC heroes often felt like gods among men. Marvel's felt like men among gods, struggling with bills, racism, identity, trauma, and addiction. Tony Stark was an alcoholic billionaire. The Hulk was a metaphor for rage and mental health struggles. The Fantastic Four were a dysfunctional family. These weren't perfect beings. They were flawed reflections of the readers themselves. And that's why Marvel exploded in popularity during the 1960s and beyond. At a time when America was going through civil rights battles, the Vietnam War, and cultural upheaval, Marvel's characters gave fans a safe place to explore their fears and hopes. They weren't escapist fantasy. They were commentary wrapped in capes and masks. Think of it like this. Marvel Comics were the Twitter threads of their day, sparking conversation about real issues but in a format people could digest and debate. Stan Lee even wrote Stan's Soapbox editorials in the back of issues, speaking directly to readers about racism, intolerance, and injustice. That boldness turned Marvel into more than just a comic company. It became a cultural force. Today, the MCU continues that tradition. Black Panther wasn't just a superhero film. It was a celebration of African identity and a critique of colonialism. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier tackled systemic racism and the weight of carrying Captain America's shield as a black man. Marvel knows that its greatest strength isn't just flashy battles. It is telling America to story through the eyes of heroes who feel human. Number 4. The Marvel Cinematic Universe was a gamble nobody believed. And it's hard to imagine now, with Marvel films pulling in billions of dollars, but the idea of the MCU was seen as a laughable gamble back in the mid-2000s. Marvel didn't even have its most famous characters. Spider-Man was locked up at Sony, the X-Men and Fantastic Four were stuck at Fox, and the Hulk was tied up in complicated rights issues with Universal. Marvel's crown jewels were out of reach. So what did the company do? It doubled down on the so-called B-list. Iron Man, Captain America, and Thor weren't household names to non-comic readers. Ask the average American in 2005 who Tony Stark was, and most would shrug. Yet Marvel put everything on the line by betting that these second-tier characters could carry a cinematic universe. To do it, they didn't even partner with a major studio. They took out a massive $525 million loan to finance their own films independently, using the film rights to their remaining characters as collateral. If the movies flopped, Marvel would lose everything, including its characters. The first test? 2008's Iron Man, directed by Jon Favreau and starring Robert Downey Jr., who at the time was considered a washed-up actor with a history of addiction and legal trouble. Studios didn't want him. Insurers didn't trust him. But Marvel took the risk, because they saw Downey's charisma as the perfect embodiment of Tony Stark. That casting decision alone could have sunk the film if it went wrong. Instead, it changed history. Iron Man wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural explosion. The charisma of Downey, the grounded tone of the film, and the shocking post-credit scene teasing Nick Fury and the Avengers Initiative blew fans' minds. For the first time, audiences realized that these movies were part of a bigger, interconnected story. Marvel's gamble had paid off. The MCU model was revolutionary in Hollywood. Instead of standalone films, Marvel created a cinematic universe just like its comics, where characters crossed over and stories connected. But remember, nobody believed it would work. Hollywood was used to sequels and trilogies, not a 20-plus film saga. Critics predicted superhero fatigue by 2010. Instead, the MCU became the most successful film franchise in history, grossing over $29 billion worldwide. It's the ultimate underdog business story. A bankrupt comic company, dismissed by rivals, risking everything on characters the world barely cared about. In classic American fashion, it was the long-shot gamble that turned into the biggest jackpot Hollywood has ever seen. Number 3. Marvel almost lost Spider-Man. Forever, Spider-Man is Marvel's most iconic character. He's their Mickey Mouse, their Superman, the hero who sells more merchandise than anyone else in the Marvel stable. But, believe it or not, Marvel once nearly sold him off forever, for pocket change. In the late 1990s, when Marvel was still reeling from bankruptcy, the company desperately needed money. They approached Sony Pictures with a deal: buy the film rights to Marvel's characters. Sony executives looked over the list, which included Iron Man, Thor, Black Panther, and dozens more, and they weren't interested. They only wanted Spider-Man. To Sony, the rest of Marvel's heroes were worthless. Marvel's response? Take the whole package for $25 million. I say, that's right. Sony could have bought Iron Man, Captain America, Thor, Black Panther, Ant-Man, and everyone else for less than the budget of a single movie. Sony passed. They only paid $10 million for Spider-Man's rights, leaving the rest behind. At first, it seemed like Sony got the better deal. Their Spider-Man films with Tobey Maguire made hundreds of millions and helped revive the superhero genre. But in hindsight, it was one of the worst missed opportunities in entertainment history. Sony could have owned the entire MCU. Instead, Marvel kept the rights to characters they later turned into billion-dollar franchises. The tug-of-war over Spider-Man didn't end there. As the MCU rose, fans begged for Spidey to join the Avengers, but because Sony owned the character, Marvel couldn't use him without a deal. After years of negotiation, the two studios finally struck an agreement, bringing Tom Holland's Spider-Man into the MCU with Captain America: Civil War in 2016. That collaboration became one of the MCU's biggest triumphs, blending Sony's most valuable hero with Marvel's unstoppable cinematic machine. But the relationship remains rocky. In 2019, Sony briefly pulled Spider-Man out of the MCU over disputes about profit sharing. Fans went into meltdown. Social media campaigns exploded, demanding the studios make peace. Eventually, they struck another deal, and Spidey returned. What does this tell us? Spider-Man's story isn't just about great power and great responsibility. And about great profits and great negotiations. For Marvel, nearly losing Spidey forever could have been a death blow. Instead, it turned into a symbol of resilience, compromise, and the sheer financial force of fan demand. Americans love a comeback, and Spider-Man's journey from near abandonment to MCU glory might be the greatest comeback of all. Number 2. Marvel almost didn't own the Avengers. Think about this. The Avengers, the single most profitable team in Marvel's history, almost didn't belong to Marvel when it mattered most. During the company's bankruptcy struggles in the 1990s, Marvel was forced to license out character rights to different studios just to stay afloat. That's how Spider-Man ended up with Sony and X-Men with Fox. But here's the kicker. At one point, the film rights to Iron Man, Thor, Black Widow, and Captain America were floating around Hollywood like unclaimed luggage. New Line Cinema had Thor. Paramount had Hulk distribution rights. Universal had a piece of Namor the Submariner. Lionsgate even toyed with making a Black Widow solo movie long before Scarlett Johansson was cast. Marvel's heroes were scattered, owned by different studios that weren't interested in building a shared universe. It took years of clawing those rights back before Marvel could assemble the Avengers in 2012. And even then, the movie was seen as an insane gamble. Joss Whedon had to juggle multiple stars, intertwining plot lines, and a budget north of $220 million. Critics predicted chaos. Instead, the Avengers became the first Marvel film to break $1 billion, instantly cementing the MCU as a global powerhouse. Imagine if Marvel hadn't regained those rights. The Avengers might never have made it to the big screen. We might have lived in a world where Iron Man was stuck in limbo at a minor studio, Thor was a forgotten myth, and Captain America was reduced to straight-to-DVD obscurity. As one of those butterfly effect business stories, tiny negotiations and buybacks that determined whether the Avengers would become the cultural phenomenon they are today. And it speaks volumes about Marvel's persistence. The company could have surrendered to fragmentation. Instead, it fought tooth and nail to reclaim its heroes, piece by piece, until it could unleash Earth's mightiest heroes together. That relentless drive to control its own destiny is why the MCU became unstoppable. Number 1. Marvel is the highest-grossing franchise in film history. Here we are, the crown jewel of Marvel facts. Forget the bankruptcies, the flops, the near sales, and the rivalries. The truth is simple. Marvel today is the single most profitable film franchise in history. As of now, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has grossed over $29 billion worldwide. That's more than Star Wars, more than Harry Potter, more than James Bond, and even more than Disney's own animated classics combined. But this fact is about more than money. It's about cultural domination. Marvel movies aren't just films, they're events. Midnight premieres sell out months in advance. Kids wear Captain America backpacks to school. Adults debate Thanos' philosophy at the office water cooler. Politicians, athletes, and musicians casually drop Marvel references in interviews. The MCU redefined what global storytelling could look like. It created a shared mythology for the modern world, where people in Los Angeles, Tokyo, Lagos, and São Paulo all know who Tony Stark is. Its mythology scaled up for a globalized planet. And like the Greek myths or Shakespeare's plays, these stories will outlast their moment, embedding themselves into the cultural DNA of generations. But here's the kicker: none of it was inevitable. Remember, this empire rose from a bankrupt comic company that once begged DC to buy its heroes. It grew from flops like Howard the Duck and near disasters like losing Spider-Man. It came from underdog bets like Blade and Iron Man, and the audacity to imagine that audiences wanted interconnected films long before Hollywood believed it possible. Marvel's story is the ultimate American tale of resilience. From the brink of collapse to the throne of pop culture, it shows what can happen when creativity, risk-taking, and sheer stubbornness collide. So there you have it, the top 10 facts about Marvel. From bankruptcy and bitter credit wars to billion-dollar gambles and cultural domination, Marvel's journey is nothing short of epic. It's not just about superheroes fighting aliens. It's about survival, innovation, and rewriting the rules of entertainment. Marvel didn't just change comics. It changed movies. It changed how we think about franchises. It changed how fans all over the world connect with each other. And it all happened because a scrappy comic company refused to stay down. If you liked this video, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with your friends. It helps more than you know. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive into the untold stories of history, culture, and entertainment. Want to support the channel even more? Hit join to unlock exclusive perks, behind-the-scenes content, and special videos just for members. And if you want to give a direct boost, use the Super Thanks button right below this video. Every contribution helps us keep bringing you incredible stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next adventure.